I've been dating my girlfriend, who I'll call Nikki, for about 3 years now. It all started innocently enough. I commented on one of her Instagram stories, and we hit it off from there. We exchanged numbers, moved to Snapchat, and after a week of chatting, we met in person. By January, we were hanging out regularly, and Valentine's Day was just around the corner. It felt like perfect timing. I was glad to have someone to spend the holiday with instead of dreading another lonely February 14th. But as Valentine's Day approached, Nikki opened up to me about something unsettling. She told me about a guy named Ben, someone she'd met during a group project at her commuter college. He was a few years older than her and had developed an unhealthy obsession with her. At first, it was just following her around campus, but it escalated when he somehow found out where she lived. He started sending her creepy texts, which she ignored, hoping he'd take the hint. She never blocked his number because, in her words, she wanted to see how far he'd go. When I asked why she was telling me this now, she explained that Ben had started reaching out to her again, specifically for Valentine's Day. He'd been texting her nonstop, and things took a darker turn when he left a box of Russell Stover chocolates on her doorstep. He even texted her, "I hope you like the gift I left you." That was the final straw for Nikki. She sent him a firm message, telling him to leave her alone and that she was seeing someone now. She also mentioned that he needed help. I did my best to reassure her that I'd protect her, but I could tell she was scared. A few days later, Nikki sent me a screenshot of a text from a fake number. The message asked if the guy she was seeing was me, using my actual name. That's when I realized this wasn't just about Nikki anymore. I was now involved, and it made me incredibly uncomfortable. Nikki was close to calling the police, and I told her I'd go with her if Ben contacted her one more time. Fast forward to Valentine's Day. Nikki and I went out to dinner at a nice waterfront restaurant. We sat outside because the weather was perfect. At one point, we noticed a guy sitting on a bench near the parking lot, wearing a hat pulled low over his face. Nikki joked, "What if that's Ben?" We laughed, but then the guy tilted his head slightly in our direction before quickly looking away and walking off. The laughter died down, and we both wondered if it really could have been him. But after a few minutes, we moved on and enjoyed the rest of our evening. After dinner, we decided to go back to my place since I had the house to myself. We were on the couch. Things were getting intimate, and then Nikki suddenly pulled away. "Did you hear that?" she asked. I had heard it too. A noise from outside in the backyard. I grabbed my slides and went out to investigate, expecting to find a raccoon or something. Instead, I found the stack of beach chairs leaning against the house knocked over. There was no wind that night, so it didn't make sense. As I scanned the yard, my eyes locked onto something tall in the bushes. I stepped closer, trying to focus, and that's when I realized it was a person. The moment he saw me notice him, he started moving quickly, almost like he was about to charge at me. I didn't hesitate. I tackled him to the ground and yelled for Nikki to call the police. He struggled, but I managed to keep him pinned until the authorities arrived. When Nikki came outside, I asked her if this was Ben. She gasped and confirmed it was him. To make it even creepier, he was wearing the same shirt as the guy we'd seen at the restaurant earlier. The police arrested him for trespassing, and Nikki pressed charges for stalking and harassment. He ended up with a misdemeanor, a fine, and a restraining order. Thankfully, he hasn't contacted her since. Looking back, it was a terrifying experience, but I'm glad I was there to protect Nikki. Ben was the ultimate creep, and I'm just thankful he's out of our lives now. 4 years ago, my now husband and I had a Valentine's Day that turned out to be anything but romantic. We planned a cute dinner at a nice restaurant like most couples do, but what happened that night still gives me chills when I think about it. As we walked into the restaurant, I noticed a couple sitting outside, staring at us in a way that felt off. I nudged my husband, then boyfriend, and whispered, "Do you see them?" He glanced over but didn't think much of it. We went inside, gave his name for the wait list, and were told it would be about 45 minutes. The host said she'd text us when our table was ready, so we decided to kill time by playing mini golf across the street. As we walked back to the car, the woman from the couple stood up and waved at us. She introduced herself as Mrs. Greddy, which already felt strange. Her husband just sat there, silent, staring at us with an unsettling smile. Mrs. Greddy held out her hand, and not wanting to be rude, I shook it. She went on to say that she and her husband were photographers and thought we'd make a great-looking couple for their portfolio. She invited us to follow them to their studio, which she claimed was just a 5-minute drive away. Red flags were going off in my head. My boyfriend politely declined, explaining that we had plans. The look she gave us as she sat back down was haunting. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her husband's expression was just blank. We got in the car, and I immediately told my boyfriend how creepy the interaction was. He agreed, but we tried to shake it off. When we got to the mini golf place, it was completely empty, which was unusual. We laughed about how eerie it felt, but I couldn't shake the unease. The place wasn't huge, and you could see the front door from every level. About halfway through our game, I heard the entrance bell ring. I turned around, and my heart sank. It was the same couple. Mrs. Greddy scanned the room, and when our eyes met, she gave me that same creepy smile. I told my boyfriend, and he turned to look. They were getting their clubs, and I whispered, "I'm really uncomfortable. Let's just go wait in the car." He agreed, and as we turned to leave, they were suddenly right behind us. "Crazy how we both ended up here," Mrs. Greddy said with a wide smile. Then her husband spoke for the first time. "We should face each other." Greddy versus Rod. My boyfriend froze. His last name is Rod, and hearing it come from the stranger's mouth was terrifying. We politely declined again, saying we had to go, and hurried out of there. I told my boyfriend I wanted to call it a night and just go back to his place. But he insisted we shouldn't let some random couple ruin our Valentine's Day. We waited in the car for about 15 minutes, talking about how bizarre the whole situation was, until we got the text that our table was ready. Dinner was nice, but I couldn't fully relax. At one point, I thought I saw Mrs. Greddy peeking around a corner, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. After dinner, we headed to my boyfriend's place. To get there, you have to drive down a long, tree-lined road that's pretty isolated. About halfway down the road, we noticed a car following us. My boyfriend pulled into a CVS parking lot, and we both went inside to use the restroom. When we came out, the car was gone, so we continued on our way. A few minutes later, as we were driving down that same tree-lined road, we heard a loud pop. My boyfriend pulled over and discovered that both front tires had been slashed. He immediately put 2 and 2 together and told me to get out of the car. "We don't have much time before they get here," he said, cutting the engine and turning off the lights. He grabbed my hand, and we ran into the woods, hiding behind some trees and bushes. My boyfriend called the police and quickly explained the situation, but he couldn't stay on the line. As we lay there, we heard a car engine approaching. My boyfriend whispered, "Stay down." We heard the car stop, and then Mrs. Greddy's voice rang out. We took too long. The car door slammed, and the vehicle sped away. We stayed hidden until the police arrived a few minutes later. We explained everything to the officers, but they didn't find any trace of the couple. My sister came to pick us up, and my boyfriend called a tow truck for his car. For years later, we still don't know who that couple was or what they wanted. We're married now, and while it's a crazy story to tell, it's also a reminder of how unpredictable life can be. I'm a 20-year-old woman living on the West Coast, and I've been here for about 8 months now. This story happened during my first month here, and it's something I'll never forget. I work at a restaurant that partners with delivery apps, so I see the same delivery drivers multiple times a day. Over time, I've gotten to know most of them pretty well, except for one. He only came in during our busiest hours, and he always tried to strike up a conversation. I usually ignored him, not thinking much of it, but looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. One evening, he came in to pick up multiple orders. I handed him the food, barely acknowledging him, and turned around to continue working. That's when he said, "You don't even want to say hi to me?" He smiled at me, but it wasn't the kind of smile you give a stranger. It was the kind you'd give a friend. It threw me off, but I forced a smile and said, "I hope you have a good night." He rolled his eyes, left to put the deliveries in his car, and then came back with his phone in hand. "Put your number in here," he said, pushing his phone toward me. I politely declined, but he didn't take no for an answer. The restaurant was empty except for the chef in the back, and I couldn't get his attention. Feeling cornered, I wrote down a fake number on a napkin. To my horror, he immediately dialed it and put the phone to his ear. When it didn't ring, he rolled his eyes and said, "Just give me your real number." I panicked and wrote down my real number, but without the area code. I'd recently moved here, so I hoped he wouldn't be able to figure it out. But he looked at the number and said, "You didn't write down your area code." My heart started racing. I'd never given him my name, and I didn't wear a name tag. How did he know it? "Pick up when I call," he said, "or I won't leave." He called, and my phone vibrated in my pocket. I showed him the screen, and he finally left. I felt sick to my stomach, knowing I just made a huge mistake. The worst part was my commute home. I took the bus, which involved multiple transfers and took about an hour. It wasn't a problem during the day, but at night, it felt risky. About halfway through my commute that night, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, thinking it might be a coworker asking me to cover a shift. Instead, I heard his voice. "Oh, babe, you didn't have to take the bus home. I would have driven you. Someone as pretty as you shouldn't have to do that. What are you doing tonight? Do you want to come over? My friends are here." I hung up immediately. When I got off the bus, I was relieved to see my neighbor sitting near the front. I walked home with him, feeling safer, but the calls and texts didn't stop. For the next 2 weeks, I got at least 10 calls and 15 texts a day. At first, they were just compliments about how pretty he thought I was, but they quickly turned creepy. He started offering me money and saying he could find me a better job suited for a girl like me. He even started coming into the restaurant more often, making me feel even more uncomfortable. Finally, I told my boss what was happening. The next time he came in, my boss pulled him aside and warned him that his behavior wasn't acceptable. He stopped for about a month, but then things escalated again. By this point, I'd picked up a second job in the mornings. I started walking to work around 5:30 a.m., when it was still dark outside. One morning, as I was walking, I saw him. He appeared out of nowhere, walking beside me like we were friends, and put his arm around my shoulder. Every alarm in my body went off. "I've been waiting for you," he said. "Let me walk you to work. You won't regret it." I told him I had homework to do and ducked into the nearest cafe. The workers there let me stay inside until he left. After that, the calls started coming in more frequently, and his messages became angrier. In a moment of desperation, I told him I was gay, hoping it would make him back off. He didn't. "Just give me a chance," he said. "I can change you. You've never had a man treat you right. You won't regret it." Things quieted down for a while, but about a month ago, I started getting strange comments on my Instagram posts. "Wow, so beautiful. There are so many things I would do to you. Stop ignoring me. I'm trying to treat you right." I blocked him, but he kept making new accounts. He'd call and leave long, rambling messages that I tried to ignore. I stopped taking the bus and made sure my friends and family knew about the situation, just in case anything happened to me. Then, on Valentine's Day, he showed up outside my window at 3 a.m. I woke up to him screaming my name. I live on a busy street, and my bedroom has large windows. I'd left them open that night because the weather was nice. He kept yelling, "I can see you. I know you're there. Come down and talk to me." Before he left, he said one last thing. "You won't regret it." I haven't heard from him since, but I'm still on edge. I've taken every precaution I can think of, but I know I'll never feel completely safe again.